Number 1. This sad, terrible story took place in the year 2003, when I was a 14 or 15-year-old girl, still living in my home country of Uruguay. My best friend at the time, who was the same age as me, was my neighbor, who lived with her mother and grandmother 3 houses down from mine. We had been friends since we were babies. We grew up together, went to the same school, moved in the same social circles, went on vacation together, shared clothes, CDs, food. We were basically sisters, our families were so close. Her mum, early 30s at the time, was a single mum working as a secretary. They didn't have it bad. Between her salary and her grandmother's pension, they lived comfortably and without any major setbacks. Her mum started seeing a foreign guy who was in the country for business. He claimed to be from Spain, but he had a funny accent, as if he was originally from Italy or some other non-Spanish speaking country. He was supposedly rich, despite staying in a rickety, dingy hotel. He would often show pictures of himself in a very luxurious residence. He said it was his house in Ibiza. Pictures of him driving a red sports car, a picture of him in front of the Eiffel Tower. How innocent we were. After about a month and a half or so of dating, my friend's mum said they were leaving the country in perhaps the next 6 or 7 months. She was in love with him, and he had promised her a life of luxury in Europe and everything was going to be perfect. The country they were moving to? Spain. Her and her daughter. The grandma couldn't come. At least not yet. She was supposed to meet them in the future after they'd settled in. This is where I come in. Since I was such good friends with Maritza, the guy had told Maritza's mum to bring me along for vacation, that it would be good for Maritza, make the transition easier, etc. I was, of course, thrilled. A month in Europe with my best friend who was moving away, and the idea of going over every summer and staying at her stepdad's mansion, it was a dream. My parents, of course, weren't so thrilled at first, but as they got to know him, they liked him, and eventually he won them over too. I even got a little job as a waitress at my uncle's restaurant to help my parents with the plane ticket and other costs. We got my passport. We were ready to go. As the months went by, it became evident that I wasn't going to be able to go. The money I'd saved wasn't enough. It didn't even cover half of the ticket, and my parents couldn't come up with the rest of the money for the trip. A week or so before they left, the guy came to my house and talked to my parents. He offered to pay for my plane ticket. My parents politely declined. I was fuming. I swore I'd never talk to my parents again. I didn't come out of my room for days. Eventually I got over it, and when it was time to go to the airport and say goodbye to them, I did. We cried, we hugged, we promised each other that we'd meet up next summer. By then I'd have been able to save the money. They left. We never heard from them again. The days went by and nothing. I remember the grandmother, the pain on her face, the night she went on without sleeping, home alone with her daughter and granddaughter who was supposed to call her as soon as they arrived in Spain, and yet they never did. Eventually, they were reported as missing. Surprisingly enough, the guy had given out his real name the whole time. So the cops got involved, and it turns out that he had a huge record in Spain and Italy, and had been in jail for drugs, prostitution, kidnapping, extortion, and God knows what else. The police told their family that they were most likely sold into a human trafficking ring, and sadly, there were too many cases like it. There was nothing to do but wait. Last time anyone saw them or had any register of them was at the airport in Seville when they arrived. Nothing else. It breaks my heart, even to this day, and to think that if my parents had said yes, I wouldn't be here today, and that sends chills down my spine. Sometimes I look Maritza up on Facebook, in hopes that I'll find her. Maybe she regained back her life and her freedom, but nothing ever shows up. The grandmother died in 2013 too, sadly without ever seeing her daughter or granddaughter again. Number 2. I was about 25 and out drinking with a friend the night this started. We ended up talking to some woman at the pub most of the night and went back to their place. Just my luck, the woman I liked passed out on the couch, so I decided to walk home at 2:30 AM like an idiot. The city I live in is a decent size, with good and bad neighbourhoods. Unfortunately, I had to walk through one of the worst to get home, which was a few miles away. I only had about $10 to my name, so a cab wasn't happening. About halfway home, I pass a 24-hour adult novelty store, and of course my drunk brain decides it's a good idea to check it out. As I'm flipping through the latest issue of some smut mag, I notice they have an area with private booths showing videos. I really wish I'd never walked in there. I step into a dark booth and deposit some quarters. The screen comes on and there's a button to switch between different videos. To the side of the button, I see movement, so I look closer and it's a small hole, and I can see an eye looking at me. Immediately I got out of the booth and walked out, too embarrassed to tell the guy working. So I continue on my way home, a little grossed out, but glad I noticed the eye before it got a show. About 5 minutes of walking and I get that feeling. I turn my head quick, and he freezes. He's across the street, about 100 feet behind me, but I can see him clearly from the streetlight. It was a guy. He looked to be in his mid-50s with shoulder-length grey hair and a long pale face with penetrating eyes. We stared at each other for a second, until I noticed he had something in his hand. His shoes. My first thought was, this guy's trying to sneak up on me, which pissed me off bad. I yelled "fuck you" in the deepest voice my vocal cords could muster, and he turned and walked back in the direction he came. My adrenaline was pumping at this point, and I was pretty scared, so I ran for a while until I was positive this guy was long gone. A little more walking and I'm finally home, safe in my bed. Something wakes me up, and the clock says 4:30 AM. A few seconds go by, and I hear it again, loud and clear. It's a cigarette lighter, right outside my first floor window. I laid there, wondering if this guy actually ran and followed me home. I didn't hear the lighter again, or anything else, but I stayed in bed, listening, until the sun came up. Once it was light outside, I looked out my window but saw nobody, so I grabbed a bat and went outside to have a look. The guy was gone, but he left me a note in the dirt, under my window. Just 2 words. Slice you. My apartment lease was up in a month, and I spent that month paranoid and hardly sleeping, but luckily I never saw him again. Once the lease was up, I moved across town, but I still wonder if I'll ever bump into him again. Number 3. On Saturday I got a call from a few friends about going to the mall. It was a stressful week at work, so I thought some retail therapy would definitely help. We shopped for the typical lady stuff like makeup, lingerie and shoes, before we decided on hitting the food hall for a spot of lunch. I gave the girls my order and told them I would come and find them, as I needed to use the restroom. The restrooms were at the end of a large and wide corridor. They were your typical mall type, with lots of stalls. Anyway, so I sat down to, well, you know. And I could see from the gap on the floor, between the wall of the stall and the floor, lots of movement from someone's shadow. I wasn't sure if they were getting changed or not, so I didn't pay much attention at first. But it felt like the shadow was coming from above me at some points. You know, as if the light above were being obstructed by something. After maybe the 3rd time, I decided to look up, and I could see a phone and parts of a guy's arm leaning over. Someone was taking photos of me. I instantly shouted, "What the fuck, you fucking pervert?" And in a moment of sheer shock and disbelief, this all quickly turned to fear, as I got up and leapt out of the stall, and was greeted by an empty bathroom. Not one person was in sight, and from the quick glance of the mirrors opposite, there was only one stall, shut. That was the one next to mine. I ran for the restroom exit, but it was locked. Luckily it had a twist lock that I could turn, and as I did, I heard a stall open from behind me. I got out immediately and turned as I exited, and noticed a sign on the door saying, "Closed for maintenance." This sign was not here when I went in. I screamed some more, shouting to get anyone's attention as I ran down the corridor towards the food hall and had obviously caught the attention of a few people. A group of 3 guys stopped me and could clearly see the panic in my eyes. They quizzed me and I explained. 2 of them ran towards the ladies' restroom and 1 went to find security. Security arrived within seconds. After a while, a rather large crowd had gathered due to the commotion, and although I was in the comfort of my friends, security, and now the police, I'd never felt more alone. Security, the police, the 2 guys, nobody found anyone. There was a few staff only and fire exit doors down the corridor, so plenty of escape routes for whoever this guy was to go through. I gave my statement down at the station later that day, once my parents showed up. The police said that they have security tapes from the CCTV cameras that point down the corridor, and will keep us updated with any news. Hopefully they find this guy. Number 4. I'm 23 years old, and as a child, my family and I would spend all 3 months of summer at my grandpa's huge farmhouse in Tirana, Albania, which is around 7 miles from the nearest town. Apart from an old computer, my grandparents have a complete lack of recent technology, so I often found myself exploring woods, taking long relaxing walks which I liked because it gave me time to think, and a lot of the time I went hunting with my dad and grandpa in search of coyotes and foxes which would kill our livestock. Just to be more clear, I'd been taught to shoot for years at this point, and I found myself to be quite a good shot. One particular day, it was around 1 PM. Bored out of my mind, I decided to take my grandpa's 2 German shepherds for a walk. Eventually we got to one of my favourite places, a crystal clear river, around 7 foot wide. Walking, I noticed a tall man on the other side of the river, with his back turned to me. He was wearing a pair of black jeans and a hoodie, which I found odd considering it's around 80 degrees this time of year. Even more concerning is that there's usually nobody around for at least a few miles. Despite this, I spoke to him and asked if he was lost or if he needed any directions. He ignored me completely, not even acknowledging I was there. I continued to walk and had eventually made some distance from this person. Then I heard him crossing the river and come across to the side I was standing on. I turned around to see him, just standing there, with his eyes wide open, almost as if he was surprised to see me. Trying not to think much of this, I continued walking, only to notice that he was following me at a slightly faster pace. I turned around and said, "Do you want something, sir?" I said this in confidence, simply because I had my grandpa's 2 dogs with me. He began to walk much faster towards me. Now I was genuinely scared. I knew nothing of this man, who he was, what he wanted, if he was armed. So I ran. To avoid leading him directly to my grandpa's farmhouse, I cut through a small woodland, at which point I thought I'd lost him and continued to make my way back home. I spoke nothing of this to my parents. That same night, I went ahead to my room and decided to call it a night. At around 2 PM, I was woken with the sound of leaves being stepped on right outside the sliding door to my room. Slightly alarmed, I decided to not get worried, hoping it was just one of the dogs. So I lay back down, facing away from the door. A few seconds later, I saw this shadow creep up at my door. I was frozen in pure shock. Slowly turning around, I saw the figure of a man. I rushed to switch on the lamp by the side of my bed and quickly picked up my grandpa's old Carcano rifle. Trying to sound intimidating, I told the guy to get away in a rather squeamish voice. He stood there for a few seconds, and then quickly pushed my sliding door to the side. Knowing full well I didn't have it in me to shoot him, I screamed for my dad as loud as I could. He continued to stare at me until my dad barged the door open and he ran into the woodland. In anger, my dad took the rifle out of my hands and started shooting into the night in hopes of one of the rounds catching him. The next morning the police were called, but could do nothing about it apart from file a report. I didn't know if it was the man from the river or not, so again I ended up saying nothing. I thought if I did, I could get an innocent man arrested. Around 2 weeks later, I still hadn't gotten over what had happened. On that day's paper, we saw an article titled 18-year-old boy murdered in his sleep. I translated this as best as I could from Albanian. At the bottom of the article, there was a picture of the man I saw at the river, with the same surprised expression, as if he had no idea what was going on. My parents didn't let me fully read the article, knowing it would just make me feel worse. To this day, I feel two things. Regret that I didn't pull the trigger, and guilt, knowing that if I had, that boy would still be alive today. His figure still haunts me. Number 5. So, I work at a small McDonald's in an even smaller town in the south of the US, and I've encountered many strange people and seen some fucked up things so far, but I saw something today that I thought I'd never see, and I was shocked to see how many people didn't notice or didn't care about what was taking place right next to them. I was working behind the counter at around 7 PM, and we had lots of people in the lobby, a few children as well. I like kids, so I usually watch them play around in the lobby because they're really cute, but I got distracted by the large amount of customers we had to serve and ignored them for about 15 minutes. I looked back when I heard a man ask in a small voice, almost a whisper, "So, how old are you?" I turn around to see this extremely tall man with a shaven head and a red shirt talking to a little girl who looked to be about 5 or 6. He had a little boy around the same age on his shoulders who was giggling. They were beautiful children with blonde hair and blue eyes. I saw that they were happy and the guy seemed friendly, but something in my head was extremely worried. I was immediately suspicious, seeing as the kids weren't his. What grown man would ask a little girl how old she was? And if he knew who they were, wouldn't he already know that? Why would he care? But after this, he said something that made my heart sink. "You should come with me now. I have a little brother who's 6 too. Let's go play with him." He then began to walk to the exit with the boy on his shoulders and the girl tagging along, and I immediately shot for the door to stop him, just as a lady with blonde hair came out of the bathroom, shouting, "Hey, where are you guys going? Get over here." The tall guy froze, with eyes as big as saucers. He was fucking petrified. The lady then scooped up the little girl in her arm, and reaches for the boy as the tall guy lets him down, stammering, "Oh, I was just playing with your kids. They're really nice kids. I just really like kids," all at once with a nervous smile. The blonde lady then faked a smile back, but still had eyes that clearly said, "Stay the fuck away from my children, you fucking creep." But her mouth ended up saying, "Oh, well, I'm glad you had a nice time, but we need to order now." And she led her kids back to the restaurant. The tall guy then hurried out of the front exit, and the lady clutched her kids close to her for the entire time she was there, even in their booth. If I ever see that guy at work again, I'll immediately call the cops on him. Who knows what could have happened to those kids if I wasn't looking, or if their mother hadn't come out of the bathroom at that very second. I think that it's awful that she left her kids unattended in a full restaurant lobby, but no one deserves to lose their children to such a disgusting creep with such a sick grin like that. Hi guys, if you enjoyed this video then make sure to click that big sumptuous subscribe button at the top of the screen right there, and also don't forget to check out some of my other content, You can just follow the thumbnails on the screen, or you can check out my channel. Pick and choose, it's your choice. Also, you should check out the artwork of Anthony Salinas. He provided a lot of the artwork featured in this video, and he does some amazing pieces ranging from horror to pop culture. Links to his Facebook page, along with links to my social media outlets, can be found in the description below. Don't forget to share your scary stories with me, and leave me any questions for my upcoming Q&A video in the comments below as well. So until my next video, stay spooky, and remember, the best things happen in the dark.